Welcome everyone to the second forum of Critical Symposium, convening on the theme of Politics and Poetics of Care. My name is Tony and I'm the organizer of the symposium. So I would first like to thank everyone for taking the time to be here today for the symposium, especially our incredible artists who are going to share their practice work / research along the theme of care. All the speakers in today's forum recently graduated with an MA from the RCA, myself included, and I will let the speakers introduce themselves at the start of the presentations. So before we start, I would really like to take this opportunity to share what Critical Symposium is. So Critical Symposium is an artistic research forum that meets online monthly on various themes with multidisciplinary artists and creative practitioners from around the globe to engage in critical discourse within the premise of critical, responsive, and research-based art practices as a way to expand, contribute, and engage in interdisciplinary knowledge, collaboration, and innovation. Driven by an interest to locate and discern various forms of research involved and generated through creative practices, Critical Symposium aims to tangentially situate discourse with and through practice and to explore how they inform and expand understanding of each other. So, simply put, it is a forum to try and locate research with practice. So research in all forms are encouraged in their multifaceted methodologies, from textual and visual analysis to audiovisual, archival, autoethnographic, and field research, in order to expand upon the capabilities of what a practice-based research can come to mean. So you can find more information about Critical Symposium on its website, critical-symposium.com. Anyway, now onto the format of the symposium. So it runs for 2 hours. The first hour starts with a brief welcome, which is what we are doing now. This will be followed by the artist response to the theme. For this month, it's Politics and Poetics of Care for 10 to 15 minutes, starting with Alice, Deb, Mujtaba, and then Julie. In the second hour, we collectively engage in a free-flowing critical discussion around the theme and research that the artists will be sharing. And for today's forum, we end with a sharing of our thoughts on navigating life, career, and work after graduating. And so before we start, I would just like to mention some housekeeping. So this is an open forum, so everyone is included to participate. Everyone is encouraged to participate with an inquisitive mind. For the sake of continuity, we will address questions for the speakers in the second half, rather than in between the presentations. Participants are free to turn on their cameras, you use the audio feature or chat function, or raise the hand, use the raise hand option to engage. And also the sessions are recorded, so please be aware of that, and they will be published online after the session. And also a note for the participants, please raise trigger warnings in case that is needed. And also if you are showing text on the screen, please read it out for accessibility purposes. So now we can start with the forum. The care as a thought actor offer is usually rendered to vulnerable and incapable bodies. Building on this, can care be expanded to understand ways in which systems that produce such classification, differentiation continue to operate, perpetuate, sustain, control, produce, and disseminate knowledges of body and non-bodies? What stake does care hold to be reimagined beyond the political to the poetical, to ideas of tenderness and nurture? In the second edition, we collectively initiate a re-examination into understanding what care is, who is it for, who offers it, who operates it, what are its implications. This session delves into the political and poetical redefinitions of care. So we will start with the presentations now. So Alice, do you want to start?
Sure. I am a bit disorganized, and so bear with me. have like 3 rubbish little slides to show you, but some other bits as well. So, okay. So hello, I'm Alice. I was on the Contemporary Art Practice programme. I was going to start by just talking about, I guess, my starting point from where my interest in kind of care as a sort of thought process came from. And really it came from a very practical space of working in a nail salon. And I think like often we think about care as this thing placed upon people who are maybe like less abled or the elderly or children. And I guess working in a nail salon like made me realize the small ways of kind of acts of service of care that could be given even to those that what might seem like a superficial act of care, but could be like embedded in our kind of like daily lives. So I kind of was thinking through how I felt, I guess, working in that nail salon in a very base level way. And most of my practice circles around writing. So I'm just going to read this, which was a small like fragment of something that I wrote quite a while ago now. And sort of, yeah, my very beginning starting point really about thinking about care as something I wanted to explore more. Drawing between the toes is something I forget to do myself pretty often, but since I got the job at the nail salon, I do it 3 days a week for strangers. It seems right to be firm when drying toes. It's an act that requires confidence. All toes react differently. Some don't like the attention, squeal back and curl over. Others are placid, squishy, soft little worms that feel as though they might flatten if pressed too hard. Others are fairly stubborn, refusing the towel's interjection into their space, but all toes have to be dried. When I place the towel around their feet and push my fingers into the toe gaps, I feel like I'm their mother. I've never been a mother in the strictly scientific, biological, patriarchal definition of a mother, but I feel like a mother to them. It feels kind of nice. It's just a pedicure. It's just superficial beautifying, but it feels like motherhood to me. So when I first started to think about this, I guess I was thinking about, I did a lot of work around the nail salon and like performances of me doing like manicures and stuff like that. And I guess I was thinking about maybe 3 different aspects of care in that space. So acts of service, which are maybe, I guess, like kind of what we immediately think of when we think of caring for someone. And then a kind of like embodied or bodily care, which could be for yourself or could be for another, the kind of like intimacy that is kind of happens through care. And then the final thing, which is the thing that I kind of ended up settling a bit more on and exploring more, was this idea of like communal choral care. So I was also thinking about the conversations that happened within a beauty salon or a nail salon, and the fact that conversations weren't always like one-to-one. They would be kind of like happening in the whole room between many people at once. And that kind of became the starting point for me thinking about like choral acts of care or like larger community acts of care. And how that might happen through conversation. And particularly for me, that was rooted in like a kind of female or femme space, and a kind of like opposition to a patriarchal, like one-dimensional conversation or like hegemonic idea. It became like this multi-idea, multi-choral, many people doing things at once together in like a shared space. So then after that kind of like beginning place, in our kind of like dissertation, I guess I went a bit deeper into that and moved a little bit more from what I felt was like, I guess like a kind of like concrete basic level of my understanding of care to something a bit more complicated and a bit more woven, I guess. So this was just like, I just put this on the screen, I'll read it out, which was just like my abstract from my dissertation as like a beginning starting point. So it's centered around these 3 terms: reading together aloud, which was the title. And I took reading to be kind of understanding, knowledge, interpretation, speaking, together, embodiment, commune, shared, choral, desire, relationships, and aloud, queer, voice, sonic, swarm, self, listening, reclamation. Reading together aloud is a collection and a gathering of the ways in which we might come to knowledge and understanding alongside one another through commune. Using these 3 terms expansively, this text feels around the possibilities and potentials that may lie in adopting the choral approach for art making, for writing, for language, for speaking, for communing, for living, for care. Crucially, it aims to be a beginning and does not make a formal argument with a definite endpoint. Instead, it operates as a place for accumulating in abundance, a wishing well, so that we may equip ourselves with the tools required to resist and to reclaim. So I guess through this kind of like research, I felt like my understanding of care became a bit more layered and like complicated. And I was focusing on this idea of care through reading, through knowledge production, and through also particularly the sharing of how we come to knowledge, the process of how we get there. And yeah, reading as this kind of act of care and act of attention. And I don't really mean just reading as in like reading words on a page. I took reading to mean this like very expanded idea of reading. So whether that was like looking at an artwork was a way of reading it, or watching a film, or listening to someone else talk. And listening actually became like a really important part of it. So this idea of like taking reading to mean like researching, going deeper, close reading, finding ways to understand, and particularly taking the time to understand, slowing down to do a close reading. And that was one of my like main like New Year's resolutions, even in terms of art, was like, instead of going to a gallery and looking at every piece of work in the show, was just like sitting with one for like 40 minutes and really thinking about it. So like what we do, I guess, at uni in Crits, and like expanding that to a gallery, and then what that would mean if I expanded that to like other broader things within life. So through the research, I guess I was like, yeah, thinking about how this like taking time was like an act of resistance to a hyper-sped capitalist world around us. And how those like poetics of care within art practice might become a politics of care and vice versa, and how those things were like a cycle. In my work in particular, as it's very like text-based, I was thinking specifically about text, language, performance, the sonic, and how those artworks that use those things might complicate the world around us and complicate the conversation that happens. And then I might show you a quick clip. Tell me if you are not seeing what I'm seeing, but I was going to show you, wait, not that. Oh, you know what? I don't think I did share sound, so I might just unshare and then start again. Okay, so I was looking at a few different artists, but one of them was Sophie Young, who does installations and performance and writing. But a big part of her work is this kind of like fragmented looping language and a constant like repetition and like complicating how words are used. So just show a small clip of this.
Atop an ancient hill. A plastic hanger atop an ancient hill. This hilarious, the way she paraded herself down the corridor, a stain of dubious background on her shapeless behind, and accosted by swarming flocks of cheap perfume. Foreground, a 4-3 cases, 4 grounds for discrimination before I took things into my own smudgy backstaged hand. It is staged thusly Before I continue, I'll insert a paragraph I can always exclude up later about social boundaries, divisions 1, 2, 3 and 2 halves.
So I guess what I found like really interesting about Sophie Young was, like, you probably heard that bit at the beginning where she's like, this hill, hilarious. She does like a lot of that kind of like where she like merges the words into other words, and it becomes at some points like seemingly completely nonsensical. And I found her really interesting because when I first started looking at her work, it's be like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, and I still come back to it all the time. And for me, that's like a really important and interesting aspect, is, and a kind of act of care is me like still going back to look at it, still trying to understand it 4 or 5 years later, still not. And that kind of like persistence to trying to get close to something, trying to understand something, really trying to hear something, even when it might not fit with what you normally understand. And in a broader spectrum for me, that was like thinking about, other positionalities that we don't understand, that are not from the same background as us or the same sexuality as us, and how we take the care and the time to listen to that consistently, even if it's difficult for us to understand in the first instance. And I guess like for me, that's also what contemporary art does in general. Like often it doesn't use materials, even like Sophie Young's installations as well and things, like doesn't use materials in their maybe designed state or their usual state, but complicates them and perhaps confuses us in the process of doing that, and maybe how that confusion can force us to listen a little bit harder, to take a little bit more care. And for me in my research, that specifically links to like queer theory. And sorry, now thank you, back to this. Yeah, how that links back to a kind of like queering of the conversation. And so, yeah, I focused a lot of my research around that, and particularly around people like Barthes, who use language in like a very strange kind of manipulated way. And it's really like linked to the body in some way. And again, so yeah, always coming back to a kind of like queer theory or feminist theory of how like language can become embodied, and what embodying that language does, and what that means for like how we listen to it. Yeah, I guess like how that manifests in my own practice is my writing has become more and more like that, and it's taken like quite a long process and a long time for me to have the confidence to like write things that aren't cohesive, that don't make sense, and to like accept that people might find that difficult, that like that's part of the process, is that they don't necessarily listen to it and go like, oh yeah, really enjoyed that. It's more like you have to sit with it and you have to take the time to hear it. I was just going to read as well this quote from Callie Spooner, who's another artist that uses text. She writes a lot of like scripts and plays, and similar to something that I do is like she'll like really extract text from like advertising and then like repurposes it, so it's like placed in a new situation. And I think there's something about that as well that again is like forcing you to reassess, and again thinking about that like idea of time and slowing down, or linear time and non-linear time. So she says, if chrononormativity in its simplest terms is us all running on the same clock, this clock can often render invisible things that are slower and more durational, such as maintenance and care, that are crucial to our survival and to more sustainable approaches to living. Chrononormative history goes hand in hand with this and is often criticised as supporting linear, often masculine or accelerationist accounts of history, accounts that are usually written by those who hold most power and who fix and determine their narratives according to their watch and profit. I'm trying to speak of the damage that chrononormativity can do, or at least render and make visible the moments where it's present, thereby understanding better how a resilience to it might be developed. So I guess just to like sum up, I suppose I'm thinking about care in like a very expanded sense, and not necessarily like this act that is just given, but also an act that is taken, and thinking about it in this non-linear way, in a multi way, how many people are engaging with it at once, how it's a cycle, and how it can be interrupted and disjointed and still return back, and how that kind of like disjointedness forces us to pay more attention to people, pay more attention to voices that we wouldn't necessarily hear all the time. And that, I think, helps to think about care. I think sometimes we can think about care as like this one-way street, this thing that is just done to someone else in order to help someone that maybe needs it or whatever. And I think thinking about it in this way makes it more of like a cycle that's ongoing, and helps to understand how we are giving and taking like all the time, and that continues on and on. And I just put this final quote up by Imar Abbasi-Okon, which says, "I am not interested in cohesiveness at all," which I just think is like such a great quote. Like this idea that instead of trying to make everyone align and put everyone in one direction and come to one conclusion, is to like understand that there are many multi things happening at once, and we don't need to be cohesive. We just need to like listen to the non-cohesiveness, I suppose. That's it. I'm going to round up there. Sorry if that was just a load of babble.
No.
No, that was great. Thank you so much. Should we move on to Deb?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I've written a short essay. I promise it is short, and I know that the word essay is scary, so I'm going to share my PowerPoint. I have put it on the screen as well, so if anyone needs to read it instead of me reading it out, it's available there. But I'm gonna get straight into it. So to overcare in spaces of carelessness, who cares for our public spaces? Back in February 2022, I had written, "I left my glasses at home today because I didn't know what they had touched, and I went on my merry way to B&Q and Homebase to see what art supplies I could find. I walked there, and this area seems to be notorious for its batteries and misplacement of such things. I walked too closely to one that had been left on the floor, but I didn't know if it was one. It looked a bit like a small bit of branch with that green stuff that grows like mold, or it was a battery that had rusted and had some kind of green on top of it, or it was a branch, or it was a battery. Even as I went back to check, I couldn't make out the reality of it, so I walked off, stepping in puddles on the way to the store. I'm anxious. I'm on my way home now, and I remembered that I prayed to the billboard on the way here, and I'd have to do it on the way back. The gesture is important here. You don't close your hands, but that you're aware of where they are as you communicate with this billboard offering funerals from £1,250. I repeat the words in my head that I've practiced like a ritual. I keep aware of its presence, and I try to look at it as much as possible, unless there are people around, and I'll try to be normal again. Most importantly, I don't smile. My reality changes depending on who's looking. I think it's important to recognize, despite the fact that my experience stemmed from dealing with obsessive compulsive disorder, that we all have these experiences of being overly cautious, of having rising anxiety, of fearing something uncontrollable within our public space. In spaces where we have very little control, it's easy to fall into ritualistic practices, washing away potential threats in puddles. What if our public spaces were communally looked after? Pathways, alleys, curbs. What if we were to just tidy as necessary, unafraid of, well, frankly, looking like an odd one? I think of the street sign a good few apartment blocks away, and I think about taking cleaning products so that any person new to the area can actually find their way without pulling out a phone. Importantly, there are really two facets to talk about here: care in public space. Who looks after our public space? Can we trust in ourselves to arrange, tidy, careful, and upkeep? Can we be both the caretakers and caregivers of our locality? And the second facet is, how does carelessness in public space affect our reactions? Why do we overreact? And is it our responsibility to react to unexpected stimuli in our spaces? Should we participate in overcare in public space, i.e. removing potential threats for those with high anxiety? In an essay by Nora Heaton, and this was on, I forgot to write that on there. So this was on creating care labels, a practice in which, so Nora Heaton writes these care labels inspired by the care labels on garments. And it would basically just instruct other people that they had specific care requirements. So for instance, someone could say, I'm a single parent and I don't want to be overburdened with work, like extra work, or I don't want to spend more time working. And so they discuss creating care labels for the self to describe what issues they may be facing and what steps others can take to ease them in their space of study or work. It's a form of self-initiated action aiming to improve care and overall lifestyle. Whilst this is a great example of taking charge of your care, Heaton also writes, I believe it is important to demand care, especially during this pandemic, even if it may be primarily function as a form of institutional critique. Maria Pug de la Bella Casa writes, we must take care of things in order to remain responsible for their becomings. Could writing care labels to our institutions be a way of not just demanding their care, but in fact also a way of caring for those institutions by asking them to change by supporting their becomings? And so I wonder how reciprocal is change and care, and can moderate overcare be utilized? Frankly, can we look odd to care for the other? Can we pick up littered cleaning bottles and discarded batteries? Would it be weird if I cleaned that darn sign? And how would this effort affect the responsibilities of local waste collection management and policies nearby? How can individual efforts not shrink the responsibilities of those who provide public care? All questions that I consider in my practice while overcoming my own rabbit hole of overcaring. And that's all of it. Sorry if I ran through that. I think I've maybe read this over and over again so much that it's like, I read it a bit fast, but was that all okay? Cool.
Thank you so much.
Sorry.
Should we move on to Mujtaba?
Yep. Hello. Thank you so very much, Tony, for again having me. And thank you so very much for all the artists and panel, Alice, Deb, and Julie, and for sharing wonderful works. I'm excited to look for to see Julie's work as well. But for now, so I am just letting you know how do I care of my hair. So it's very important, it's very integral part of my overall presence, maybe. And I got to know about this thing after my grad show at Truman. I'll come to that point later on in my presentation, but to start off with, I'm just going to give you a pro hack and tip. If you follow it, so you can definitely take care of your hair in a very better way. So what I do normally, so I don't know whether you can see or not. So every day, 3 times you just need to bend over, flip your hair, and then give your head a good massage. You can see, right? So you just need to focus on each and every part of your head. Don't ignore your sides, your back, your crown, your front hairline, because that's where normally men start losing their hair from, and it starts receding. So you just need to be heavily focused on your hairline as well, so that you can promote blood circulation to your head. The more the efficient blood circulation you will have, the more beautiful, gorgeous locks you will be left with. So you can do this thing for like good 10 to 12 to 15 minutes even, right? So you see, and for hair like mine, it's also a very pro tip if you just want to give it a very good volume. And so yeah. Now let me share my screen. And so now my fingers are a little bit oily because I have an oily skin and hair as well. So please do let me know if you can see my screen now being shared. Is it visible? Yeah, perfect. So yeah, just to give you a very brief introduction and reference point on which I'm going to reflect today as a work of my research that was heavily focused on Ukraine and Afghanistan for like past 2 good years at my college. So for my degree show, I decided to go with this very short, straightforward installation where you can see there's a setup staged for people to come and visit and see and respond. So there's a LCD screen on which a few images of mine have been, collected and made a show reel of. And then there's a vase of flowers, and there's a note as well. So people were expected to come close to the installation and read the note that is placed at the very left of the installation. And it all says, Mujtaba Asif, an enrolled student at the Royal College of Art, embarked on a quest for wartime poetry, journeying to Afghanistan and arriving in Lviv, Ukraine on June 3rd, 2023. Regrettably, he never returned. So you may leave your messages and express support for his family, who eagerly awaits his return in the book placed on the table. So that was the book that was there for people to express their feelings and send their messages to my family. So the fun part of the whole comments and the whole feedback that I received during the 3 and 4 days of the show, a few people actually ended up leaving this very beautiful message to me and also made me realize that the most important part of my whole existence is my hair, probably for a few of them. So they were more concerned about my hair. So your hair will be missed, right? So I am again going to be sharing with you how do I take care of my hair. So this is the brand. It's called Gin. Thank God it's all natural something. So the owner and the owner of the brand is basically a graduate from Harvard. She lives in the States. And the fun part of this product and the whole line is it's got all the natural ingredients, like top 10 ingredients is heavily organic and natural. So that's the best product line I love to stick to. So this is the Triple Moisture Replenishing Conditioner. I've got moisture-rich, sulfate-free shampoo, the same line. And sometimes when I literally feel loved, so I do apply this hair mask, again, the same line. Yeah, I'm learning the text and it's always appearing reverse. And along with it, I also massage my hair and head once a week it's a must, with a lot of good oils. So I've got this sesame seed oil, then I've got this avocado, then pumpkin, and it's very good for male baldness, And this is rosemary, a blend of a lot of this essential oil things. And last but not the least, argan. I've got like 10 to 15 other oils as well in my hair care routine that I'm not going to talk about today. But yeah, that's just to give you an idea that these are the fundamental things that I do stick to for my hair care routine. So I think the politics and the poetics of care and love and empathy also is very subjective and is heavily politicized, because I have been invested totally on Afghanistan and Ukraine at the same time, and we all are aware of the crises that both of those countries are and still are facing. That is insane. So at the same time, we witnessed a lot of beautiful journalism and reporting across the globe from the established media organization. So I'm just going to share with a few screen grabs of a few reportings that were made during that time. So the first one is from this reporter and NBC News, and where she says, just to give you in the context of what's happening there. So it's like all the reportings at the very start I'm going to share it is from when people from Ukraine started to flee, and they were seeking safe stay in other European countries. So the first journalist here she says, these are not refugees from Syria. These are Christians. They are white. They are very similar to us. The second one we have got here is again CBS News, very senior journalist, and he says, this is not Iraq or Afghanistan. This is a relatively civilized, relatively European city. One of my most favorites, and he's such a sweetheart. And on BBC, it's very emotional for me because I see European people with blue eyes and blonde hair being killed. At the same time, not only we got acknowledgement and endorsement from the journalists, but also personalities who have got higher authority in their regime ended up saying these beautiful quotes. These people are intelligent, they are educated people. This is not the refugee wave we have been used to. People we were not sure about their identity, people with unclear pasts, who could have been even terrorists. Prime Minister of Bulgaria. And at the same time, because as I mentioned, I was heavily focused on both of the countries because I'm from Pakistan, so my country is also surrounded with these two territories, So we share our borders with Afghanistan as well. So in Afghanistan, what's happening at the same time? Afghans forced to sell their kidneys as extreme hunger tightens industry. And this is not the, I think, single event. This is not the single event that people were selling their organs really to survive, to thrive, in order to be able to live. So desperate Afghans sell kidney amid poverty, starvation, a lot of stuff. And very interestingly, there was one news that I witnessed back in 2022, and it was all saying that 19 girls aged ranging from 19 to 21, they all sold one of their kidneys. And today and tomorrow, I was really, really trying hard to find that link, and I could not find it anywhere online. I used all the keywords, I used everything possible, but I could not find the same reporting in the piece of news. I don't know where did it go, but maybe my failure, but I did not find it so far. So here, you can also see people in Afghanistan, they're not only selling their daughters and organs, but they're also sedating their children with drugs. really, in order to, get them a good sleep, because they don't have food to feed them with. So that's the very shortest, smartest way to sedate them and, and push them to a very beautiful sleep, so that they won't be asking for the food. Afghans are giving their hungry children medicines to sedate them. Here they are really sugarcoating the medicine, but you can go online and on YouTube. You'll find hundreds of coverages where journalists were exposing what those medicines are. They all are homemade drugs. Others have sold their daughters and organs to survive in the second winter since the Taliban took over, and foreign funds were frozen. Millions are a step away from famine. So yeah, and this is again me with my gorgeous, beautiful hair. And yeah, and I think, and now I'm very much concerned about my hair as well, because I imagine if I had not this hair, so people even were not mindful and sympathetic and empathetic to my news that I went to Ukraine and never came back, So yeah, that was it for today from me. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mujtaba. Should we move on to Julie?
Julie, I think you're still on mute, for me at least.
There we go. That's it. Thank you. Okay, can you hear me now? I'm sorry about that. Okay, so my presentation does mention the subject suicide, and it is all about maybe how I managed to care for myself, and through that sort of process of learning, really hope I can care for other people or show a way that they can care for themselves. So, and I was going to try and sort of rewrite it to fit in just exactly with the theme of the crit, but I thought best that I just go with what I've got and just sort of give the story, from my heart. It's much easier that way. So maybe a bit of background. I was widowed in 2009. My late husband Carl was 43. We have two children. We had two boys who were 8 and 10. So as you can probably imagine, it was pretty shocking. It was a cataclysmic change to our lives, and it just changed everything about us. And I think even though it's 14 years down the line, it's still a really important sort of conversation. And this conversation, it continuously evolves, finding different ways to talk about it. So when I came to the RCA, the work I'd made before the RCA, I alluded to kind of what had happened through the way I made. And I'll show you a photograph of that right at the very end of the presentation. So when I came to the RCA, they really challenge you. They really challenge you to think about your making. Why do you only do such and such? And I used to just draw with, well, I still do it. I draw with my sewing machine, and I became quite good at it and won some awards. And they wanted to know, why did I only use a sewing machine? And I only used the sewing machine because it was a way that I could care for myself, because it was familiar. It was a tool that I loved the sound of it. It just took me back to my childhood. And drawing was really frightening. I'd been told in the past, don't draw, you're not good at it. It's on my BA, find a different way to work. So of course, when somebody's vulnerable, the last thing you're then going to do is think, okay, I'll just shelve the drawing but anyway, I didn't shelve it. I then rethought about drawing and started working with my sewing machine. So I get to the RCA and they want to challenge me again. And why do I only draw? So I just thought, right, okay, I'll just revisit this whole story again, and I'll start drawing with my eyes closed, because I can't look at what I'm doing, because I'll be scared that I won't make it won't work. And then I discovered that I was making a draw, and I was closing my eyes and I was touching my face and I was making these drawings, and the drawings just corresponded to how I was feeling inside. If it was an angry day or a sad day, the lines were really hard and they were smudged and it would go through the paper. But trying to get myself to this point of being able to do this work and knowing that I was still talking about suicide and about how it affected us, even though I was at the RCA and they were really challenging my practice, so that terrified me. And so the only way that I could really explore this process of making my work was to look at other artists who talk about trauma. And for me, it was 14 years. Could I still keep going on about the same thing? And then I'm always referring back to artists who do just talk about trauma, and the subject of trauma just continuously happens in their work. And there's no time limit, because this is something that I'm finding quite hard. And so with the drawing, so going back to this idea of the drawing, I started drawing and making these marks, and then I realized that they were really relating to how I felt. And then also, there was also this correlation to sort of what was going on inside my mind. Now, when you sort of suffer from traumatic loss, the memories are just absolutely fragmented. They're broken up, they're buried really deep in your mind, and trying to find a way to relate to them and in a way where you can help yourself to recover. It's sort of fundamental. So I was making these drawings, and how I was feeling was going onto the paper, and then I layered them as well. So how I might feel one day would be different, and then there'd be another drawing the next day. Each drawing would affect the drawing that had come before. And I continued with this work, exploring how I was feeling, and using this book, The Body Keeps a Score, to kind of help me understand what was going on with these drawings and why these drawings were so important. And I've read the book so many times that I've had to look after the book and sellotape its spine back together lots of times. So when I'm making these drawings, it's really sort of a curious thing. So when I first had a conversation with Tony, we're just thinking, well, it's sort of a performative act. I'm closing my eyes, I'm touching, and I'm making these marks. And I just find, well, actually, I really want to do them in my own place. I don't want them to be a performance. They're just for me. They're about touching my body and making the marks, and then me looking at the marks and helping to understand how that's engaging with my conversation. I'm gonna just go back and we'll just play this one. You can see as I touch, I've got my eyes closed, and I just make the marks, and they're all different. And then I was really interested in, when we had the work in progress show, and this word performance, I kept thinking, it's not performance, it's about caring for myself. This is about touching my body. This is about feeling what's going on inside. It's about making a mark that I can then use to have the conversation about suicide, about what happens to the body and the mind. But then performance part I realized actually there was a performance. I had to stand at the work in progress show, and I had to stand by my work, which was waving around like the images on the right. And they were about my body. So suddenly, and then people wanted to know what the work was about. And there the performance began. I used this work to talk and to have a conversation. And it was fascinating what other people had to say as well. So I tried various ways of making my marks and having these conversations. So I tried digital stitch, a really interesting process, but it was a little bit like I couldn't quite relate to it. It wasn't as sensitive a mark as I could make with my eyes and my hand. And I kept exploring this process. Anyway, as I was building up these drawings in layers on clean pieces of muslin, I started to pick up messes and stains on the fabrics below. And then that really made me start to think about an artist called Jackie Hallam and how she gathers messes from her environment onto the fabrics. And I just thought, then I started thinking about this, sort of that process of sort of caring for yourself. But it's really hard to care for yourself I think it's quite important to look at what's happened to you in your life to understand, why you are like you are, maybe to give yourself a little bit, to be able to be kind to yourself. So I started to think about how could I gather these stains? We've all had things happen to us, good things, bad things, things we might not notice, things we really remember, and they all affect who we are, what we might say, and decisions that we might make. So I started wrapping up fabrics in bottles of dyes and carrying them around and letting the stains, whatever I'd done in the day, sort of, carrying this fabric with the bottles inside, it would all leak and they'd spread. And then I would unwrap them and I would just have this, all these different marks. And so the next idea then was to think about, right, okay, well, if I've got all these marks and I've got my drawings on the silk screens, I'll place my drawings, these layered drawings, onto the fabric. And I'll let the stains affect what happens to the drawings. So, so the stains are made by chance and the drawings are made with my eyes closed. And then let me just go back a minute, and then I would put them together onto the fabrics. So I wasn't, and also the colors were quite interesting. I don't really like pretty colors, but I discovered, the bottles that I was just picking up dyes, some of them I was mixing together, and there was a lot of pretty colors. So that was a whole new conversation. I was really uncomfortable with that. I'm really sort of, I kind of like work with a bit sort of gritty, and I like sort of monochromatic, and suddenly there are all these colors. But it's like in life, we can't choose everything that happens to us. Sometimes things just happen. So I just had to work with the colors that turned up that were in the bottles. But then I also was thinking about these stains and about how for me, it's really important that I'm acknowledging what's happened in my life. I might be a bit of a complicated person. I might sometimes react in a different way to other people, or I might suddenly get emotional when other people are wondering, well, what's the matter? And then you just think, well, it's these things that have happened to us in our lives. And this idea of maybe embellishing the stains and just, again, people might look at it as being decorative. So people can interpret it how they would like. So this was the piece that I hung at the degree show. And again, this just all happened by chance, but she just happens to have a bruise on her chest. The colour is the acid yellow, a colour I would never sort of choose. And it's full size as well. But for me, this was all about, I was closing my eyes, I was responding to what was going on inside. I was making a silk screen, building it up in layers, just as we are all complicated people. Everything that happens to us in life affects what comes next, and then putting it onto this messy stained backing cloth. But I also had lots of time trying to think about how I might hang the work as well, because I think that was quite important for the conversation, because I was really wanted to make people understand that this is a conversation about suicide, and it's where sometimes you might want to say something and then the next day that conversation doesn't feel right, so you might want to hang the work in a different way, you might want to throw it on the floor. I had lots of ideas, but in the end I did end up being, I guess, it was with the space I had at the time and trying to hang my work, which was already, I just decided I would just go with the easiest option, and I just hung it on an angle and let it move in the breeze. So when you see the drawings that I'm making at the RCA, the one on the left is what I made before I came to the RCA. So it's digital, it's a free, not digital, it's a free machine embroidered drawing. So what you can see is a picture of my dad. It's just made out of stitch. There's no fabric involved. And when I made that piece of work, I would stitch and I would really control what was happening with the making. I didn't want anything to move around. And they take hundreds of hours to make, and then at the end, and you have to wash them, and all the dissolvable fabric disappears, and you're left with just stitches. But in that process, the drawing has moved around, the threads have changed, and the errors have happened. So I knew that after Carl died, I would try and control my life too. I didn't want anything else to go wrong. And that was what I was doing with my work. I wasn't really able to, I wanted to say what was happening, but I was scared of saying what was happening. So I made these drawings that I knew what they were exploring, but the public didn't necessarily have to know that unless they spoke to me. But at the RCA, they've really empowered me to care on a level that I didn't even realize was possible. They gave me this opportunity to really say what was happening, and to be really honest, and they let me say what was happening, and people weren't shocked, and they were supportive. And well, because it's recording, I won't quite say what happened at the degree show, at the graduate show, but I did have some really interesting conversations with the public about my work. But it was slightly more complicated conversations with family. And I think that helped me to believe that actually what I was doing was still really, really important. It still affected us. And through finding my voice and being able to talk about it, it's been really empowering for me, but also helped me to engage and hope that I can help, get other people to share and join in with the conversation. And just one other sort of caveat as regards to care. I've worked in the NHS for 35 years, but I feel like there's been more caring, I feel, in my 2 years at the RCA than maybe I had in my whole career when I was working in the NHS. And that's it. And thank you. I'm sorry it's a bit long, and I just
Not at all. Thank you so much, Julie, for sharing. So I think thanks to all our speakers for sharing their work and being generous in approaching the theme for this month, care, in like very multifaceted ways. So I think we can move on to like the discussion part of the forum. And I encourage like everyone to feel generous to like, just share their thoughts and queries or like comments about, the practice and research. But I was thinking that maybe I could start with a question. There are a couple of questions that I would like to ask each of you individually. But I was just thinking that maybe we can start with like a broader question, which is relating to this forum. This forum is like, it's an artistic research forum. And from my understanding, being at Darcy and, being part of it and understanding what artistic research is, it's relatively a new, if you want to call it an academic field. Again, I guess that is something to be contested with, like is arts an academic field, and does academic research make it very institutionalized? But I was just wondering if and talking about artistic research, what artistic research is to like various people, people who are pursuing like, let's say research as a career, artistic research in their career. I feel like the approaches to that topic is varied depending on their own practice. So mainly because the practices change and the methodologies change, it's very specific to that person's, the artist's own practice. So I was thinking that maybe we could start with, just like sort of collecting what your individual thoughts are on how do you understand artistic research, and what are its implications? Like, do you find it to have a place within art practice? Is it something that needs to be actively pursued within practice? Like, what is its place with relation to your own practice? Like, is it something, maybe I think talking about your practice in relation to research would be interesting to hear. So would anyone like to start, or should we go in the order?
I don't mind starting. I guess for me, research is like incredibly important and like the absolute sort of like backbone of my work. But I would also say that research isn't necessarily like reading journals or academic texts, that research is also like Julie carrying the inks around in her bag. That is, to me, research. Or watching a film, checking in with like how you're feeling about things, like all of that for me constitutes research. And I'm sure you guys will all agree that, I feel really lucky that we were still part of the year that did the dissertation, because that really helped me to understand the kind of like breadth of what research can be, or what it can be considered, particularly in like artistic practice anyway. And like maybe in other kind of disciplines, the spectrum wouldn't be so broad. But for us and for like our practice of writing and research, what doing that dissertation helped me to see was that like anything could constitute research, and that you could, and that's what I think is my most the thing that I enjoy most about art, I think, is that you can kind of use anything as research, and you can like almost like philosophize over anything. And that's the potential for that, for me, is like really exciting. Like the potential of like, taking something tiny and then connecting loads of different things. And I think that's what's really interesting about art, is that it's kind of, people talk about maths, don't they, as like this kind of like shared language. And maths is like a shared language with rules. And for me, art practice is like a shared language without rules. And like that is like a really fascinating place for research, I think, because it means it can just like really spread out everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, Alice, that the way that you talk about research really ties into the way that you were talking about the way that we're talking about reading. It's this expanded sort of like expanding the vocabulary, and I think it's so appropriate. And it's research is everything. All of your input really does affect your output, which is something I've definitely learned over the last 2 years, is that like all experience contributes to your research. It's wholly everything, isn't it? Yeah.
I think that also like links with like what Julie was saying about like, personal experience and how you gather those.
Yeah.
And I think maybe like gathering for me is a particular word in terms of research. And I don't know if any of you have read Ursula Le Guin's Bag of Stars, but that is like, for me, sorry, Carry a Bag of Fiction. I don't know why I just called it Bag of Stars. But I think that is like that thing as well, of like this gathering of like, you've got this basket and you're adding things to it all the time, and what is left in there, what can you then make out of that? I find that like a fascinating idea in terms of research as well, and of a very like maybe a more kind of like progressive, artistic, and I would also say like feminist approach to research, like a non-linear approach, that there's not one way to research, that you can like pick all these different things and then see what you're left with.
Yeah, it is. It's really interesting, because when we had my exam, last question was on research and what do you think about research? And so I sort of plied into talking about the books that I need to use to help me feel confident, still carrying on with this conversation. And then the tutor said, "Oh, that's really interesting that you just talk about the academic research." And they said, "What about, what you've been doing?" And I just thought, oh, I hadn't really thought about that as research. I just think it's experimenting. I try something, I learn from it, and something else happens. And I thought, you know, and I knew, but I think it's how we just have these different terms for research. You know, for me, it was experimenting, and the tutor was trying to say, well, that's your research. And so it can happen in all sorts of ways. I guess even Mustafa's book as well, you know, getting people to write in there, that's his research, and getting, you know, so research can be sort of new and happening at the moment as well, can't it? So, but I think without, you know, research is just about asking questions, and I can't, you know, and that's what the RCA is quite good at making you do, and that's what the dissertation is good at. I think you're right. We were so fortunate to be in that last group doing the dissertation. It just, you know, with doing that, you just became more confident in the second year with exploring your own ideas. So
yeah, I think also like what you just said, Julia, about like we kind of often, I think, especially because obviously we're part of an institution, you kind of think of like this academic research. And for me, I think like it's really actually like an active, important thing to not just use academic research, particularly considering that like academic history is like white men of a certain class. And so like it's important, and particularly in an art practice, to be bringing research that doesn't abide by that, in order that, and bringing it into an institution, bringing it into an academic field, bringing it into our kind of like dissertations, so that what now becomes research is our academic papers that include things that aren't that, I guess.
yeah, I think that's really
Yeah,
true.
I think that's really yeah, I think that's really interesting, like when you're talking, because like when you look at like, you know, like when we look at academic texts, you know, or you know, this, or especially within like art research, you know, Foucault, Deleuze, and all those like people come up. And I think when I was working on my dissertation, you know, obviously I was looking for references for my work, and you know, it was and in a way, like I that's when I sort of started realizing that, you know, this a lot of like the texts that I were referring to, like inevitably happen to be from, you know, like written by white people. Like, so in a way, I was sort of, you know, I was exploring my own cultural standing as well in terms of my references. And I mean, in terms of my dissertation, I was thinking that, oh, you know, like I'm trying to understand my own cultural thing through the lens of, you know, maybe like a Eurocentric approach. And I think that's really interesting that you said that, you know, like artistic research accommodates or gives space for alternative, like, you know, what you might not call as academic research. And I think it gives space for, you know, I guess, voices to also come up, and which I think is like very evident in your practice, Alice, when you're talking about like disjointed or like choral conversations, and where it becomes a space that accommodates different voices. Yeah. Mujtaba, I don't know if there is something that you would like to add in terms of like, how do you understand
because
by artists?
because when I was consuming a lot of written content when I was doing my dissertation thing, so I happened to read a lot, mainly content written by Noam Chomsky, and I then realized that there is a very broad divide between the two. One is really a very huge supporting group for Noam Chomsky, what he has written so far. One is in extremely very harsh in opposition, you know. So while a lot of his work is very factual, and that can be assessed, that can be reevaluated by just going to the archives and looking at the numbers and figures that he actually all the time talks about. But also I find that I'm a person who loves to hold a conversation with people. So mainly because I gathered a lot by doing it. So I still have a huge collection of recorded pieces where I was talking to a lot of refugees in London mainly, and from Afghanistan and Ukraine and Iraq and Palestine and so many other places as well. So because what I feel that the content, the originality the genuine emotions, the transformative journeys, the transitional pain that they had to face is very pure, very authentic. And so many times you can't find those things, those stories being mentioned in any newspapers and magazines and mainstream media. So I have got like a lot of data, and talking about those minute details. Um, like um, like there's a story of one man I still remember who said that American army was in Afghanistan, so they would come to our homes anytime they wish, and they just rub our daughters' cheeks, and sometimes they just undress them for fun, and sometimes they videograph them, so in front of the whole family. So, but you don't find those factual things, being archived. So gathering and collecting a lot of information and knowledge, maybe from people, from the verbal history, is very important to me. Very important to me, because there I find a connection between a listener and a speaker, where you are nobody to judge. It's coming from a person who has seen those things in the first place. So yeah, and reflecting those things through my work is again very important thing to me. Because there's a very important book by Sara Ahmed, and the title of the book is Cultural Politics of Emotion, where she had a great critique when she was talking about the marginalized segregation between the global South and the rest of the world. So yeah, I mean, it's very interesting to agree with something and to disagree with something at the same time.
Yeah, and I think I was just like thinking in between this conversation also about like how our art practice obviously is, research, and as you said, Mujtaba, like when you were collecting, information, I mean, that becomes practice, right? So it's with your practice that these knowledges are being uncovered or produced or like dissipated through that. And I think that's, I guess, the ethos of artistic research, isn't it? Like not just like making artwork and then sort of referencing or supporting or making it valid with existing academic research. So, I think this is a conversation that I really like, I'm just like very curious about artistic, I'm very interested in that topic, and it's something that I try to find more information about, and it feels like there is no like, I don't know if you guys feel the same, but I from what I am understood, that there is no like, because it's so varied, because art practices are so varied, like research is such a, like defining artistic research is tricky. And so my question again, like, building on this, like I was just thinking about like, what about you're all saying about not just using academic text, but then my question is like, what about referencing? Because that's, what I'm thinking is about the validity of the research. I'm thinking of a research which is not academic, because in research you need to, your research is supported by a certain validity, isn't it? So I wonder to what extent, how does that happen? Like, I think the straightforward way is supporting your research with existing research. But then I wonder if like there are approaches that you take in your own practice to support your, like practice or research.
I guess
I'm not sure if that question is like clear. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess for me, where that comes in is just criticality. And so like it's never assuming that any of your research, whether it's highly academic or not academic at all is like a fact. And it's like, I think when you were talking then as well, Tony, like it was making me think about how I think sometimes as artists, because we've always sort of like grown up or believed that like our subject is not academic, right? That it's like maybe not as well respected or whatever, that we kind of think that research is this thing that happens before, and you do all your research and you get all your facts and then you make a piece of work. But in fact, it doesn't work like that, at least not for me. Research in my case actually is more of like building awareness of what's going on around me, of the world that's around me, the conversations that are happening, and making work and then feeding back. And so it becomes like this cycle. And so in that sense, it's like, you know, and the term of this whole group, like Critical Symposium, is just like any research that I gather is like looking at it, thinking about what's right about it, what's wrong about it, what I agree with, what I disagree with, who else agrees with it, who else disagrees with it. And like, it's not this like isolated moment of like, okay, I've gathered that thing and now it's a fact and now I can build something on it. It's more like, oh, here's another piece of a puzzle that becomes a bigger conversation. And in that sense, like, no matter how academic or unacademic it is, you treat it, or I would say I would treat it with the same level of like respect and the same level of like interrogation. And in doing that, you give it validity, I think, because you're treating it with just the same amount of like interrogation. And the same way as like, I guess if you took that, this kind of like, we're talking about the poetics of care or the politics of care, if you kind of live by that, then you are like treating everyone's voice with the same level of like consideration, I suppose. And the same for me goes for research.
I think it's also important to kind of dissect the word of validity and to like kind of understand that things that we have given historically validity to prior over other you know, sort of facets of truth. It's interesting to sort of it's really important to kind of break down what it is that you are looking at. I mean, if you're reading, if it's just like a book that you read or like an archive, it's like, okay, so what was the curation of that archive, and what was the choices made that these certain objects or these certain items are looked after, conserved, and restored. And when you're looking at researching these things, it's important to just take a step back and just think, you know, there shouldn't really necessarily be a hierarchy of validity when it comes to objects, reading, text, anything like that. I think you need to sort of just understand what is true to maybe your experiences, or yeah, it's just I think it does come down a lot to perspective, and there is like scientific validity, but I think that again, it's all just kind of very subjective, because even if like something's held up to a scientific standard, it's like, okay, who's the standard by, what is the standard, and how relevant is it to today? I think that's quite important too.
I think an interesting thing about research as well is kind of well, what do I need? You know, what am I looking for? And that helps you then to decide if a piece of research is going to be sort of valid or not. Can be, like I say, very subjective according to what you're looking for. Because as part of my research, sort of after Carl had died, is sort of trying to understand why nobody in the family spoke about it, why he didn't speak about it. And so I would spend ages looking for the research that helped me to answer those questions. Doesn't mean to say it was right or it was wrong, but it helped me to understand and to not judge. But that piece of research might not have been useful for somebody else. I offered it to other people and they didn't understand it and it didn't make. So I think it's very subjective what we're looking for as well. And often research, just like you said, it's just a trigger point, isn't it? It's just a trigger point to make you start heading off in a different direction until you come across and do your own research. So it's I think it's, you know, it's many things, and quite often it is what you need what you might be looking for as well to help you solve a problem.
I also I just want to return to the Tony's question that the validity of your research and references that you might be using in your work, because it's very questionable to me, because I feel not even a single thing in the whole world is without having any biases, because I remember there's a book in British Library where there was a photographer who was asked to photograph the subcontinent during the time of British rule. All those areas where you can't find any women in the public spaces, and you should photograph only those places, and also the huge and vast landscape with no people really. And you can find this book in British Library. I don't remember the title of the book. And why is that? Just to give an impression to the rest of the world that people living in the subcontinent have no cultural values, they have no life, and the women there in their society are not even allowed to go out and mingle with the man, openly. And the second incident that I remember very clearly, back in 2018 and 2019, there was a German photographer. He went to Pakistan, mainly Lahore, to document the very rich, very vibrant culture of Lahore. And he captured tons of photographs. And then he went back to Berlin and asked his publisher to publish this book, and he was refused, just because they said that it's the other side of Pakistan that we don't want to talk about. You need to find some other publisher for it. And then he went back to Pakistan and published his book from Oxford Press from Lahore. So, so how you can say that the reference that you're using is very valid, is authentic. You can't go back to the times and you can't check the reality, So what I feel, I would rather believe what is coming from you, rather what's being written in a book. I'm very critical of the written words. I do consume it, but I like to trust more in you, maybe.
I think that kind of like links back to like maybe what defines artistic research, and also like maybe humanities, and I'm sure other things too, but is like you're not really using your research to prove something, you're using your research to begin another question, kind of thing, to open something, to open a conversation, rather than to like close it, rather than to be like, this is the answer. You're more like, here's a bunch of stuff, shall we have a conversation about it, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, there are like more questions with relation to artistic research and like humanities, like, but I don't want to like take too much time to just talk about artistic research. I also want to like touch upon like our approaches to care. So maybe like if we have time, we have half an hour. We only have half an hour, so if we have time, we can talk about that. But I would like to like go individually to each of you speakers, and just to understand a little bit about like what you talked about in your presentations. So Alice, like you were talking about care as like you are emphasizing on your approach to care as a sort of choral or communal care, a space which accommodates voices rather than drowning them, and approaching it as a cyclical process, of like giving and taking back. So I was just like wondering, in terms of your like writing practice, do you, I'm just like curious as to how you approach the writing process. Like, is it very responsive? Is it instinctively responsive, or do you spend a lot of time? Like, how does the writing process go about?
The main starting point generally for me is like, again, like a kind of gathering. So like just in daily life, and I hear like strange little bits of people's conversations or advertising slogans. I'll like sort of collect them in notes on my phone as like these strange little like removing them, I guess, from their original context, and then sort of like pushing them together. And I can't quite describe exactly why I feel like some of them fit together and others don't. And maybe I think about it sometimes in the same way as like I used to paint a lot, and like how sometimes in order to paint to really engage with like what color something needed to be, I would have to like suspend a certain level of myself, like a certain level of judgment, I guess. And sometimes I feel the same with writing, as like it's almost performative, the writing process, in that like I kind of let myself have another voice that is like not so narrative or not so like definite, and becomes more about like the sound of words next to one another. And so then the language starts to become more like a material, like paint, rather than a thing that is explaining something or describing something. And then in that way, the language becomes like, yeah, like a kind of painting or a strange tapestry of sounds, or yeah, like a new language, which I guess is like linked to what I was talking about of this kind of, when something is, I think a lot of my writing is like sort of familiar, but not. And I think that comes from like, you know, something lifted from an advertisement that's like, oh, I've kind of heard that before. Like, for example, one of the lines might be like 0% wheat, 100% indulgence, which is like obviously from like some kind of diet food or something. And then placed in this context, it's like, oh, that's the kind of thing that I recognize. It's something I probably see on the tube all the time. But why am I hearing it as part of like a script in an art gallery? Like, what's going on here? And that maybe like forces you to like listen a bit more, to like think about what is happening, where are these words coming from, and why are they being placed together? Yeah, I don't know if that does really answer your question, maybe.
No, it does. And I think that's really interesting how like how you said that you sometimes it's the way that certain words sound together. I think that's really interesting. And I was just like also wondering, like, what has that process taught you about meaning, like, or deciphering meaning, let's say, or even, because I can imagine like it would give like so many multifaceted layers of meaning within a text that you might have written, and which could have been which could hold potential to be interpreted in like different ways, or bring about ideas that you might not really have thought about. And also that is reminding me of these words, or like the letters that make up the words, as you were mentioning about the nail salon as like all these individual people, and like it's sort of accommodating varied voices to come about and come together in a way to like create new ways of relations.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
what's your take on meaning making?
I guess it's, yeah, exactly what you're saying is like, I suppose my background as well as literature, like my BA is in literature, and obviously within like modernist like poetry and stuff, it is a bit more kind of complicated, and there's not a definite reading, and well, in anything, but I guess in fiction there tends to be like a definite like narrative, I suppose. And what I definitely like learned, particularly in the last sort of like few months at the RCA, Jonathan Watts, one of our tutors, was running this like writing workshop, and I was always conflicted about my space between the art world and literature. I was like, am I a writer or am I an artist? Like, where do I fit? What makes sense here? And always confused about whether those two things came together or were separate things. And it was really only in the last few months of the degree that like I accepted this space in between, and that there's people had kept talking about this term art writing, and I was like, yeah, but what is it, and why is it any different, and what is artists writing versus writers writing? And I think there's just this strange space in the middle where, like I say, words become like a material rather than a way of like fully explaining something, maybe a way of expressing. And in the same way as like, you might go into a gallery and sort of explore art, and like kind of get something from it, but not quite know what you're getting. Sometimes you just kind of like, there's this space between like, I'm getting some knowledge from this and I'm getting some emotional feeling. I don't really know what's happening. And later something settles and like you get something else from it. And I think that's what I'm like trying to do with the writing, is like, there's various, like you say, various meanings in there. And each time I go back to it, sometimes I'm like, oh, I never realized how that next to that kind of suggests this. And so it becomes, yeah, about placement of things rather than about like telling a definite final meaning in a way.
Mm.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting because that's how I feel about myself. This sort of in-betweenness, because I think in my 2 years at RC, I was like constantly like, I am really interested in research, and I'm more of like an academic research kind of person, and I also envision myself as a researcher, and I think that's what I want to be, like doing full time, as a job or like a career. So I think these 2 years at RC, I've always been like questioning, like, am I an artist or a researcher? And that's when I was like, thinking about like artistic research. And I think also like the question, what I was like asking you all like initially, like, what do you mean by artistic research? Because as you said, I still find myself in that in between space. And like, am I an artist or a researcher? Like, where am I? Like, so anyway, it's still figuring it out. Deb, I wanted to like go to you about your presentation. You're talking about care in public spaces, and you're talking about obsessive compulsive disorder, and I could like relate a lot to it because I have OCD myself, and these sort of like ritualistic practice. And so I was wondering, like, and also you're talking about people who look like clean public spaces as well. You're talking about like cleaning the signboards. It was really, I mean, actually like three things that I wanted to ask you about. One is I forgot the first one. But yeah, the I was wondering in terms of like to what extent, like, your when you talk about like cleaning, is it how much of performativity is embedded in that, or is it something that you want to explore in your practice? And the other thing is like, what is the relation between like when you talk about care for public spaces, I was also wondering in terms of like how you approach people who like care for public spaces, like is there some overlap between those two approaches?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest questions I have with my practice is how can I practice care for public spaces as an individual myself, and go out of my way to sort of tidy, maybe clean up or pick up litter without shrinking responsibilities of like the public waste management. Because I feel like as soon as they catch on that maybe people are tidying up for them, they might be like, oh, we don't have to go there. We don't have to do as much. So it's a big question of because I find public space so incredibly important. It's a space for conviviality, for togetherness, for an ensemble, and it's a place that could be incredibly generative. And I just sort of it's something that and you kind of have to just engage with it. So you just do. So I find it really is like a big question of that I don't have the answer to, because we research in the humanities and we just don't ever reach a single finite answer. Just more questions about how you how you show care in individually in a space without shrinking other people's responsibilities, not necessarily people, but government body responsibilities. There's this quote from the Care Manifesto, which says that there are a few covered public places in the British capital besides libraries, churches, and museums where it's possible to spend time without spending money, which makes it a haven for many, especially those with young children. And that reclaiming and extending public placemaking then enables us to build communities that care. And I find this so important to sort of highlight that that need. And sorry, what was the first question? I think I just went straight into the last one that you asked, Tony. What was the first question that you asked?
Oh yeah, I mean the first question was about like, have you thought about, integrating like when you're talking about cleaning as an act, like, is that, do you approach this, do you just look at it from is it just an idea, like an OCD compulsion, like a ritualistic thought, or is it like a artistic practice?
So it started as just a compulsion to want to sort of, actually, it's less a compulsion and more exposure for myself. So my ritual would have been, and I'm sure you know about the dealing with sort of like OCD. So a lot of the way that you sort of handle your or sort of manage is through exposure therapy, and my habits are normally to avoid certain things that I'm afraid of. So if I see a battery that's might have leaked, I don't know if it has, but it maybe it's like an old discarded battery on one side of the street, I will walk on the other side of the street. I like completely avoid it. But as exposure, they teach you to sort of face your sort of fears, and that the more that you do it, the more you'll get comfortable, and the less you'll see it as a potential threat to yourself, despite the fact that discarded batteries are a threat to wildlife, children, anyone who actually wants to go and spend time in public spaces. So it came about as an idea of just first, like, let's see if it's exposure, and then of course, as we were saying, that research for your practice comes from absolutely all of like your experiences. And it became a thing where I was thinking, okay, so what can I clean as like an artistic experience? And I started like cleaning with like really kind of heavy cleaning products, my bathroom, and filming it, and that was in my degree show. And it became just this kind of thing where I was like, these are just things that we do constantly, that people do constantly. And I started to wonder why, sort of what was the difference between sort of cleaning in your own home and cleaning in the outdoor space where everyone's sharing it, and sort of where do we draw the line between things we care for? That, I mean, I think that the line is pretty clear, that we care for the things that we want to signify ownership over. And so it would be, how revolutionary would it be for us to care for things that we don't own, that we don't care for things that are outside of ourselves.
And following upon that, like what you just said right now about like claiming ownership, you also talked about you not wanting to shrink the responsibilities of the state in caring for it.
Yeah.
Like you don't want to take away that responsibility, or like that space which is for those people. So I was just wondering if you like, have you come about to understanding that, approaching that, that like, am I taking space, or
Yeah,
I
mean, it's a balance that I wouldn't know how to broach. And if anyone else has any ideas on this, I would be really happy to hear them, because I just I couldn't quite grasp around my head, like, say if I was to do like a group activity where like I maybe me and a bunch of other artists went out to go clean the space or regularly, or like as maintenance, like how would that affect suddenly like waste management or government responsibilities to pick up fly tipping or litter picking and or like just caring for wild or very rare and sporadic wildlife. So it seems it does seem like a balance that I haven't quite I'm purely at the level of speculation with these ideas at the moment. So it's just a balance that it's not an off-putting, tremendously off-putting to the idea of going out and cleaning, because it would be therapeutic for myself and potentially others, but it is also, it's just it's like a fear in my head that because I think it's so important that we demand, as I said in my presentation, that I'd quoted, that we demand our institutions care for us. And I think it's really important that all institutions need to provide a level of care, and that it can't be shrunk in any kind of way by our actions.
Yeah, maybe the answer to, I think that's such an interesting question, like, like taking up space, like, maybe the answer to that question, like maybe it might come if you actually, do you think like if you go to the public and start cleaning, and in that process, like it will be like a research where you're able to answer that question. I think that'll be like really interesting. Like maybe you might come up with some thoughts, or try to
I think the answer is going to be in doing,
like...
isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. I think also like what you just said right now about like institutions having to care for us, I think it'd be interesting to hear what Julie says about that, because as you said, you worked as a like providing care, right, in the NHS. But before that, I actually want to like I want to go through the order of the presentation. Like I want to ask Mujtaba a question. You started the presentation with a performative work of hair care, caring for your hair. And obviously that is loaded with a lot of like political significance, which you reference in terms of your latest work. And then you talked about refugees and like migration. So I was just like trying to understand, is there something more with relation to that, to the performative piece of like the hair care and refugee? Is there something that you want to add?
Yeah, I think that was all about how we pick and choose, and how do we select, and what are those standards and criteria and parameters that we go by and see things and respond to, because a few people were only concerned for my hair, not my life. Same goes with the refugees, sorry, and crossing the borders. I mean, it's a very huge and very broad debate and discussion still to this time as well, when people from certain countries, and when they flee, when they migrate, and how they are treated, and while people from other countries, when they have to, so how they were treated. So it's all about, picking and choosing your own priorities, your own thing, and things that you feel connected to. So that was all about this, because I am now, as you just mentioned, we also want to talk about the future projects maybe. So that's my new series of work where I am literally only talking about my hair care, and I am eliminating my whole presence and just emphasizing on my hair, maybe the different forms of hair, because I never thought this way, but that those comments actually gave me an opportunity to respond to more intellectually, I feel, because maybe very soon I'm going to be performing at one of the venues in London. So yeah, I mean, that was all about it. Very, very political, but in a very, very subtle way, very poetic way, I feel, because that's how I do work. Yeah.
You're also like, you were also sharing some clips about and yeah, I mean, you're talking about, like, I mean, you shared clips about people having to sell their kidneys, and also like people being put to sleep so that they don't feel hunger. So how do you understand care as an approach with relation to, like, how are you defining care here? Like, what is your take on care here, like from these sort of references? Like, how do you approach it with relation to also, like, sleeping is obviously a form of care, right? Caring for the body. But then it's also like, it's interesting because they're going to sleep because they don't feel hunger, which is also like, taking.
Yeah, I mean, it's as same as if I love somebody and a third person loves the person that I love. So I would kill that third person because I love this person, right? So loving someone is a very pure, very beautiful thing. But in order to have that love in your life, killing somebody is going to spoil the whole love that you showed earlier to someone. So there's a very fine lines between everything, like what care is. Because if, I mean, the same time, if I am only concerned about my people, so I'm very caring, I'm very very, very sensitive to them. But at the same time, if I am extreme to this care, so I am also extreme to ignore some other groups. So if I ignore the other group just to cater my group, so really, am I caring? Am I showing sympathy to this group as well? Maybe not. So the segment, the how to say it, I mean, how we cut things into pieces and then see is something that I highly critical of, because that's not care to me. If I because I'm a Muslim, I'm from Muslim background, but if people die in Israel, I don't care what their religion is. I care because they all are human beings. They should be lived. And if I say only I'll be sensitive and responsive to the Palestinian people, and I don't give it a shit to the Israeli people and the Jewish people, if I go a bit in particular. So I'm not a sane person, I feel. So that sanity and insanity, they go side by side.
Okay. I think, yeah. I'll move on to Julie because we are running out of time. And Julie, you were talking about, like, I found it interesting how you're talking about the sewing machines, because you said it's, before you came to the RC, you were working with the sewing machines because it felt familiar, you like the sound. And I was suddenly thinking of it as, maybe it has something to do with like caring, it's, and how the sewing machine for you becomes like a tool or an apparatus of care, or was caring for you, or you were giving it care. And I'm really interested in that relationship between you and a machine here, or maybe it's a tool, or how you approach it. I'm really interested in that relationship. And I was wondering if you could, like, if you had more thoughts on that. And along with that, you also mentioned that when you were showing your work in the degree show, the response that you had with public was different from the response that you had with family. So how has that contributed to your understanding of care? And having said that, do you approach your practice as care, or has that something like, is that something that is it something that you have consciously thought about, or thought about in terms of your work, or how do you situate care within your practice?
Right. Okay, so there's a few different things so maybe I'll just cover some of them sort of separately, although they all do link together sort of really importantly. So we just talk about one of them. It's about sort of being a carer, like I was in the NHS for 35 years, and then about caring for yourself. So when I was at the RCA, I was all my sort of conversations with the tutors about the work I was doing was about how I could care for other people and help prevent what happened to our family happening to others, by how could I have this conversation around suicide and raise this, raise it to a level where we can find a safe space to talk about it and people can have open conversations, and even just get one person to go away and talk. So that's what I was really important. That's all I could focus on, and that was the only way I could give myself any credibility. I could allow myself to make work with, maybe it was a bit sort of indulgent. That's how I felt. And then my tutor said something to me, because I feel like that is still a really important part of my work. It's about how you have a conversation. And then my tutor said to me, you do realize, Julie, this can just be about yourself and about how you feel and what you want to say. And that was just such a powerful moment. And I can remember it. And I can remember feeling really tearful and really emotional. And you're thinking and saying, right, okay, so this can be about how I feel, because all I know about suicide is to not mention, people don't mention the word, don't talk about it. And now you're giving me this permission to talk about it, because actually I really, really need to. So there is a really interesting and sort of powerful move from doing my work as a carer, as trying to introduce a conversation for others, and suddenly actually, no, this is about what I need to say. This is about how I can start to feel better about things that have happened in my life. So, but I don't think that one type of caring is better than the other. I think it's really good to have compassion and to care for others, because that's really important. But maybe you can only do that if you've learned to care for yourself first of all. So I think that's really important. So with the sewing machine, I think back in school, like a lot of us have different issues with bullying and things like that, and being a bit lacking in confidence, and I used to find drawing really great when I was a child, but then suddenly as an adult, you get all these preconceived ideas of what it should be like, and it's really prohibitive, and it just and so it was just a case of thinking, well, how can I love making a mark. The mark is really important to me, and how these marks are different according to what tool you use to make them, how you feel. How can I make a mark and create and draw? And so that's how I started to use my sewing machine, because I was really interested, right, okay, if I'm trying to make all this work perfect, if I'm trying to do a drawing, rub it out, correct it, what about if I draw a tool where you can't actually correct it? You can't unpick the marks very well. The marks that you make are there unless you cut them out. And so if I let these marks and these flaws become part of the work, then nobody can criticize me. And not only that, I'm also using a tool that I love. So I've got this strength of a tool that I love and is familiar, but also knowing, well, you can't criticize this because I'm making up these rules, because I'm not doing it with paper and pencil where you're going to criticize it and tell me what I should be doing. This is my tool that has been mine since I was a child, and I'm just going to, so there is this bigger sense of freedom from using a tool that kind of is like my comfort blanket and made me feel sort of safe, but still a challenging tool. And but I love the challenge of working with it. And so that's where, so anyway, so leaving the sewing machine behind at the RCA and drawing and being so involved in monoprint was a really liberating process as well. But has made me look forward to going back and using my machine again, but with maybe hopefully with even a bit more freedom. So it's been so yeah, so that, and then and so the final question was about the show, and I think all the way through my work, it's all about this, how we have this conversation, and how for some people it's not right to have this conversation. For other people, it's, well, a lot of time is gone, you know, it's it should be in the past, or we don't think about that anymore. And the public responded with such generosity and compassion, and shared some of their stories. And then I had a conversation with, you know, a family member, and they were just surprised that I still needed to talk about it. And there's a few other sort of, the conversation carried on a bit sort of further about how much I'd been challenged as well at the RCA. And and first of all, I was quite sort of disappointed and upset, but then I came away from it thinking, actually, you know what? This is more fuel, this is more research, this is more reason to carry on making. So the people who did engage with what I was saying, but also these other people that still don't understand me. So I thought, no, it just made me feel like I'm so fortunate to be an artist and to be creating and to have this voice. So I don't know if that makes sense really, but
I would just like I would just like say, I mean, ask you, like, how has that engaging in that conversation informed you about ideas of how you think of care?
well,
like, if you could, like,
care.
Yeah.
So well, I suppose it became very sort of selfish actually, because I did feel quite hurt and quite upset. And then the care bit was like, well, how can I make myself feel better? How can I make myself believe in this voice and carry on? So it kind of just it just really fired me with the importance of talking about this subject. And so in a way, again, a way to kind of be compassionate to myself, to make myself feel better about what had happened, just drives me on to make more work. And it's a really powerful, it's really powerful. So, and then by making the work, then you provide, you know, I know that I'm caring for myself. Otherwise I could sit at home and just feel really sad.
Yeah, and as you said, like, you know, you said that, like, your conversation with your tutor, from what I understood, was like, there was this, like, when your tutor was telling you that it can just be about acknowledging how you feel, I think there was this, like, change in responsibility about, like, you know, care. I mean, it doesn't always have, as Alice said, it doesn't have to be like an outward one-way thing. But I think I think care is much more accommodating than that, right? Rather than just being like something which is to be given. All right, so I'm like, really?
Okay. No, I was going to say, and yeah, the more you care for yourself, the more you can care for other people, because then you're in a better place to do it.
Yeah. I'm very aware of time, but I have like a really burning question. I'm just like, because Mujtaba works very proactively with performance, I'm really like curious about what he thinks about Julie's like painting pieces. I'm just wondering, because it's something that you might I feel like you might have something to say about.
Yeah, I mean, I was completely touched and moved by, I mean, everyone's work, but especially Julie's work, because it's too personal. It's like a personal diary, and you know, and how you translate your true emotions on a piece of canvas, maybe, where you are also making a very harsh barrier to the viewers, because the way you feel to this subject matter, maybe so many people around you would not be able to feel it, or maybe if they do, so it's a very the temporality of expressing the emotion is very limited, I feel. I mean, it's got very, very short life. And I was, I don't know why, but when I just saw you performing and doing your, you know, touching your face and doing that stuff on the surface. So, I mean, it really a lot of beautiful ideas just popped up in my mind because the performativity, the element of action, and the moving, and I mean, it's so beautiful. And I mean, you could make like hundreds of beautiful pieces just by doing that stuff, I feel.
Yeah, I think I felt like a lot of encouragement from Tony for that. It was but I had to go through the process of actually just even showing of being comfortable with the work myself. I don't know, I'm not comfortable even, but to actually get to a level where I might actually think about it being a performance. Because before there was this need to feel better about what was happening, and I didn't mind about the performance. But now,
and also there is one more thing, very little thing, because I think so, because as we are artists, we don't make designs, right? Designs need to be very neat, and they should convey a very proper message in a very straightforward manner. But we are all artists, we make art. So I think performance does not have to be very sorted and very clear and very neat, a rawness. And I mean, I do enjoy that response to the time only, where you are not maybe prepared, but you are responding to the time. Maybe, yeah. I mean, it's very much evident in your work.
thank you.
Okay, so I think it's past 12 now, so I think we should wrap it up. I don't know if you want to like take 5 seconds each to share like how you're doing. I mean, maybe you don't have to about like in terms of your like research, like is there something that you're focusing on, like something that you have learned from, like something that you want to take forward with your after doing your MA? I don't know if you want to share like in like 5 seconds, because we'll immediately close after that. Anyone?
So it's
I mean, oh, sorry.
No, go on, you go first.
I mean, very, very briefly, I've got a few things already in the pipeline I'm working on. So maybe, yeah. Also, I'm now enjoying making art, also, physically, and getting my hands on. Because yeah, there's a couple of things that I'm working on. Maybe sharing it all, definitely. But yeah, but the performance element, I really want to take it a bit further, and maybe looking for collaboration, and people whom I had not worked before, and like Julie, and I mean, so many people who are very much into performance. So yeah, I mean, I am after people who are into performance, and they are very new at it as well. So yeah, and I think I've been reading a lot as usual. I mean, these days I am consuming Beyond Good and Evil by Nietzsche. So yeah, one of my all-time faves.
Anyone wants to go next quickly?
I just think it's quite easy, really. Just being at the RCA just gives me a confidence to make the work that I want to make for the reasons that, for what I believe in. And so but what is really, really great now is the fact that there is some time to sit back and to think. And I've been busy working on a piece of work from the RCA to go to a show. But it's just now having feel like I've got time to think, and I think it's and I'm really quite excited now about the future and about being an artist, and I've managed to really very easily leave the NHS behind. So.
Oh, Deb?
Yeah, so right now I've definitely, I mean, this whole thing as research has been wonderful, but and hearing from everybody else has been lovely. And right now my practice is at a point where I'm doing a lot more writing, and yeah, so that's it.
Great. Alice?
Honestly, my main thing is holidays. But also, I guess the main thing that I really want to keep up, besides my own personal practice, is being engaged in things like this. I think once you leave an institution, it's the thing that you miss most is these kind of bringing together. So thank you, Tony, for arranging this. I think it's so important to keep having those conversations.
Yeah, I so agree.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, I mean, all of like this is a monthly event that happens once a month on different themes. So like all of you are like, you know, more than welcome to like come back as speakers and also as participants. So you just let me know if that is something that interests you, and you know, it'll be really exciting. So having said that, I think we'll bring this forum to an end. So thank you so much. Thank you to all our speakers for generously sharing, and to our participants for being with us. Yeah, so this is a monthly thing, you know, please do engage with it. Keep watching the, you know, Instagram critical_symposium for like, you know, updates and stuff. And yeah, that's it. So thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend and see you soon.
Thank you to
Bye-bye.
you as well.
Everybody. Bye bye. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.